water. Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Well, what's that yonder I see so white? God's gonna trouble the water. Well, it must be the children of the Israelites. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade.
Friendly, not true. His little face looks like ladies. Yeah, his little face looks like ladies. Yeah.
Well, I just need to elevate my legs
Yeah.
through a bit deeper just to kind of let it settle in a little bit. Because when I'm sitting at reach.
No, you're good. So welcome to Cowee School. This school was built in 1943 from local stone here by local people that worked for the Works Progress Administration in the Civilian Conservation Corps. It served area students for decades. It only closed in 2011, so it hasn't been that long that it's turned over to us, and we manage it as the nonprofit Cowee School Arts and Heritage Center was.
I didn't know there was a
Okay. So in the individual classrooms now, we have artists who run their businesses, teach classes, sell what they make, and work in the studios, their individual studios. In the gym, we rent it out. We've rented it out right now to a community group who's going to put on a performance of the Jungle Book next weekend. So we like to do that. We like to open it up to the community. We have a new coffee shop and store here now that things have shifted around. Our artists specialize in pottery, textiles, painting, felting, quilting. We have all kinds of things. So I welcome you to take a look and let me know if you have any questions.
Question I have is,
Okay.
were there many African Americans in this region, right here?
Cowee, from what I understand, was,
I just mean closer out this way toward the mound and all that?
yes, this was at one point the largest African American community in western North Carolina.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit about the Cherokee history, because that's really
Yeah. So I'm sure you've talked about it today. This is now a cultural corridor that comes through Cowee and goes through to the mound. So we're a part of that. So we have a really close relationship with the Cherokee. We have a museum on the left side of the hallway, which is actually currently under renovation. We have an older exhibit in there now that you can see, but we plan to revamp that, and it'll be really special. So come back and see it when it's done.
And we got people from outside the area. Can you say what the mound is?
The mound is, it was an old, it was like the center of the village, so, and again, I'm not an expert in Cherokee history, but I know that the mound was built up and the village would pretty much be on top of it, so it was kind of the center and it was a very sacred place.
And it's in downtown, it's in Franklin,
No,
right?
That's the Quasi Mound. Up
Oh,
here
okay, good, tell me.
is Cowee Mound, which is a separate one. And
Oh.
so there's a very nice viewing platform on the side of the road. It's new, so you can go and you can just look off and see the mound. It's beautiful.
How far
out
down
there.
is that?
About a mile. It's not far at all.
Real fast on the way.
Down 28. Yeah, a little bit further, and it's on the
I
left.
think we'll pass it on the way to the Mingus Mill.
Yes, you will.
If you go up 28,
Yeah, you continue on 28.
you will.
Yeah. And I don't know if you noticed when you came in, we've just got a grant to do a native garden in the front here. So that's where the new fence is. And we're working, it's a little too hot to plant right now, so we've done what we can do. But the focus of that will be on local native plants, but also native Cherokee plants, traditional medicinal plants, and food plants, and we'll have nice signage to point out what each of those things are and how they were used in the past. Yeah,
When's the festival?
the festival is August 19th, and
Have
don't
your
leave.
brochures?
Don't leave without your brochures. Thank you.
That's why there's a pocket in your folder.
So any other questions for me?
Where are you gonna be in case somebody has a question?
I'll be around. I'll be right up here.
What about the events in here? Do you have anything special going on in here now?
In the
Other than
gym,
what you just,
or-
yeah.
Well, we just have classes. We have regular classes all the time. So
Okay.
there's a room at the end of the hall where that basket's hanging up. And that's what we call the co-workspace. So it's become a room where we have multiple tenants in there that come different days of the week. So we have the Smoky Mountain Quilters Guild, and they'll start Monday, and they'll have free classes for the community. And then Tuesdays, we have a basket weaving teacher, and she's wonderful. And then Wednesdays, we have yoga and wellness classes. So it's really expanding
Getting
and
this place
and
moving.
growing. Yeah, I know.
Do you still have any of the one woman events that Gary Carden wrote from Silver?
I don't think so.
Okay. I've been here to 2 events where it was a one woman show about the region, and.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
He was here a few months back for the speaker series, and
Okay.
he mentioned that, but yeah, we don't have any of his.
And they invited me once to talk, so it
Oh,
was
well, you
nice.
have to come, man.
We'll do it anytime.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's just what time do we need to be back on the bus?
What time is it right now?
1:55.
Okay, y'all help me now. So 1:55, and we need to be up at by 3:15 up to Mingus Mills, all right?
We're
So
good.
it's
Well, we got lots of-
52 minutes, so walk it back for me, when do we need to leave?
Hurry up, go.
2:50.
52 minutes.
15 minutes? Okay.
You know, Jane does archaeology at the Cowee Mountain.
I didn't know that she worked here.
Well, she's on the western back, but in conjunction with the Cherokee, they are using LiDAR, ground penetrating radar to
Thank
determine
you.
how
You're making us have a good
buildings
time.
are.
So these have flour, silk, wool, and watercolor, but that's what I'm building.
Isn't this great? We have so much history in our area, and we don't. Okay. but I mean,
I am starting to work with acrylic,
okay.
and I've painted plein air, meaning I love to paint outdoors.
Oh, yeah.
And I've
I'm such a
painted
chicken
in-
for out of doors.
Oh, it's wonderful. So everybody has the best experience. But I did paint in France for 2 weeks. Well, because you've been on boards for. Okay, so.
We were over there in Cowee. I don't know where we are now, but we were in Cowee. And I mentioned to you that there was a Baptist church that we went to when we were little kids called Piney Grove. And there's a Waynesville Missionary Baptist Association.
Hang on, y'all.
And it was one of the churches. But there have been a couple of places that have been cut off by white people who have purchased the land and put gates up so that we can't get to our historical places. One of them is Piney Grove. I was lucky enough to get over there and take some pictures of the outhouse and the inside of the church before they closed it off, but they didn't. I was told that they didn't like us being there. But it was the church. It had an old coal stove in the middle of the room. It had an organ, and when I went over there, the organ parts were all on the floor because it had gone down. But I was going to say one other thing about Pleasant Hill over there. My cousin Eskimo Howell.
Oh, I saw his grave.
Yeah, you saw Eskimo's grave? Eskimo was a cousin of mine, and he moved over into here, and according to the rumor, he didn't have much to do with the black community. But he built a little shack, and he had a little after-hours joint kind of place.
The juke joint.
Juke joint. The picture's in the book, and that he was wealthy compared to other African Americans around him. And they didn't realize just how wealthy they really were because his mother owned a whole lot of land. They didn't know that that was valuable. My dad told me that in Andrews, there was a black man who owned about 30 acres of land in what's called the Healy Fields up above the airport in Andrews. And he wanted a gun so bad, they always said he traded all of that property for an old rusty pistol. What can we say? Okay, at Piney Grove Church, Reverend Gordy Conley, we call him Gordy, and the Historical Association in Franklin has his name as Gordia, Gordy Conley. And he was the pastor at so many different churches around here. But he came to church, and obviously it wasn't that long after. It just shows you how sometimes we don't think of the intelligence and the community connections that some of these older people had. But it wasn't very long after this song came out in the 1950s when he came to our church and taught it to us. So this one, I bet everybody can sing If You're Happy and You Know It, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's sing it. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, then your face will surely show it. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. Aha! If you're happy and you know it, stomp your feet. If you're happy and you know it, stomp your feet. If you're happy and you know it, then your face will surely show it. If you're happy and you know it, stomp your feet. Aha! If you're happy and you know it, say amen. Amen! If you're happy and you know it, say amen. Amen! If you're happy and you know it, then your face will surely show it. If you're happy and you know it, say amen. Amen! Well, all right.
No, you gotta do. If you're happy and you know it, do all three. Amen.
Okay.
Happy and you know it,
do all three.
Amen.
If you're happy and you know it,
and you know it,
then your face will surely show it. If you're happy and you know it, do all three. Clap, clap, stomp, stomp. Amen. I love it. Thank you. I just want to find out if anybody has other names that we shouldn't say, because I can tell you what I don't, and what other African Americans don't want to hear. But what about white people? What about you? I have one white friend who says she hates Caucasian.
Why? That's a terrible
So what words do you have?
I hate, it doesn't have to do with being white, but it has to do with being a woman. I hate the rule of thumb.
Oh yeah.
I hate hearing the rule of thumb.
Okay, she's saying she hates the rule of thumb.
Let me hear.
What does that even mean?
So I hate hearing the rule of thumb because it's just used so flippantly, and the meaning behind it is that the thumb, that was how big the switch could be that you could beat your wife with. If it was, you know, the rule of thumb was that was, yeah. So I just, every time I hear someone say that, when I first heard it, I was just like, ooh, and so I use that opportunity because most people don't realize the meaning of that, and it's a pretty easy thing that I find. I mean, I think it's, for me, I can address that and a person and not feel like, I sometimes have a harder time talking about white or gender but the rule of, I mean, nobody should be beaten, for goodness sake, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And so just like this, anyway,
Right.
so I'm talking.
Well, that's good. Anybody else?
Any other words?
Only thing I don't like about Caucasian is I can't spell it. Otherwise, it doesn't bother
She
me.
can't spell Caucasian, that's why she doesn't like it. May I share a pet peeve?
Pardon?
I'm gonna share a pet peeve with writers, thank you. Hello? All right. A pet peeve is when writers, when you see people describing this, thank you. Okay, now okay, there we go. That when writers are writing about people, and it's white writers, and they're writing about people, and then they said, and then the black man came down the road, but they don't say a white person was there. It's like the protagonist a lot of times may be white, but they'll describe people of color. But the assumption that there's an assumption that you're writing about white people all the time. And so I appreciate writers. I appreciate writers who actually describe everybody in a story. I'm talking about fiction stories, or who describe everybody by, if it's race or whatever, that they describe them without making white the default race. Okay, so that's a pet peeve. So those of you who are writers,
Gotcha. I don't like you people.
you people.
Eleanor says she doesn't like you people.
I don't like you people.
Yeah. So did Marie. She says, not you people. Okay.
Cannot stand it.
Now what? Yeah. Makes her very angry. That you said you have.
No, I was just going to ask Marty, so should they leave out that distinction?
No. Just describe everybody.
So you're going to say the
The
black
white man.
person came to the white person.
If I were a writer and a good writer, I wouldn't do it that way.
But I'm serious. I mean, how
No,
is it?
okay.
I understand what you're saying, but how
You could say, Sally, I'm not a writer, but I can tell when I'm reading, it really annoys me. That you can say, you know, Sally with her pale skin and red hair or whatever, walked over and she really appreciated. I mean, if you're needing to describe, if you don't need to describe, don't describe. But if it's part of the story, then you can say, you know, his dark eyes and dark, you know, his ebony skin or the whatever. So you get a colorful picture other than these are white people all walking around. Oh, and there happens to be a Cherokee person, or there's an Asian person. Oh, there, you know, it's like, and we do that a lot. If you see in the newspapers, they used to do that. They do not do that as much anymore, but they always described if it was a black person in the newspapers, but they're doing better about that. So it's not, I'm not talking about go crazy and say, I sat in a bus of this many people and this person was this, and there were 4 people who had blonde hair and 6 people, I'm not talking about that. But just about be conscious that the predominant narrative does not necessarily belong to white people.
That is what I'm talking about. Can you hear me? That's what I was talking about too when I was talking to Mary, is that you can't just, What about Hellcats?
Oh, I finished reading a book, a really interesting book about Lincoln, and it was called something like the Six Encounters with Lincoln, and it talks about his relationship with 6 different groups of people. With his army, he was terrible because he would tell his army what to do, and he didn't know anything about fighting. And it goes on and on and on. He was not a good president. But the encounter that he had with women who came in to try to talk to him was entitled Hellcats.
Oh, you see, the women thing, that thing, and what I was talking to Mary about over there was that we're coming into a place where it's going to be bland and we won't know anything, and people are still going to have that old stereotype that black people are nobody, that we are terrible people. You see, in the movies, I'm very angry when I try to watch a movie on BET and you can't understand it because there's so many terrible words. I mean, I can't stand it. But I was watching one and I had to laugh about it. Night before last, I guess it was, called They Cloned Tyrone. Has anybody seen it?
I've seen that brief.
Oh my goodness. The words in there, but it's so intelligently written. I mean, if you can stand to listen to those terrible words. I don't like the F-bomb. I don't like, GD. I don't like those kind of things because I didn't grow up with that in my family. When I was married, my husband's family used a lot of bad language, I called it. And I was in the room, I was young. I mean, I was in my early 20s. They would say a bad word. We called it bad word. They'd say a bad word, and they'd look at me and they'd say, "Oh, I'm sorry, Ann." And at first I was insulted. At first I was like, "Why are you looking at me?" When they're no, they weren't. They were serious. They weren't being sarcastic. Their mother was in there. Their aunt was in there. Their female cousins. But they all used that language, but they knew I didn't. So they were being respectful. And they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Ann." And then they just keep on talking, and they wouldn't use that bad language. So I'm saying it's hard to watch those movies and all, but that one called They Cloned Tyrone, boy, I mean, she's talking about Nancy Drew, they're talking about the Jedi, I mean, they're talking about a little bit of everything in there, but you have to be able to put up with that language. Any more people have words that you can't stand said about you as race or gender or anything like that? Yes.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear it?
Okay. Well, I thought it was going to be a microphone, so I thought it was going to be loud. Okay. So this isn't really about black people. I'm black if no one can see me. But
I don't see Cowee.
But she already said it. But this goes to when Miss Ann said, don't be silent.
Yeah.
So I used to always say, if the good Lord is willing and the creek doesn't rise.
Yes.
And I recently found out that the creek is not, it originated from not water, but the Native Americans, the Creek Indians. Yes, and so that's where they came from.
Okay.
And immediately when he told me that, of course, it just ruined it for me because I just thought, how horrible. So now I only say, if the good Lord willing, But I just wanted to say that because, I mean, you can't dissect everything, but once you know,
Yes.
and it's very disrespectful,
Yeah.
and so many were murdered, and it's just, so there you go. I'm letting you know what it means, what it actually means.
Thank
It's
you.
not good, so do with it what you will.
All right. All right.
Kelly.
Well, I want to talk to you.
Okay.
Since you're Jewish,
Yeah.
my elder grandson is engaged to a really lovely young woman who is a conservative Jew.
Okay.
What types of language should we be careful not to use?
Well, there's an old saying that if there are two Jews in the room, there are 3 opinions.
So no one back here could hear that? Can you repeat it for us?
Pardon?
Did you hear the original?
No.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, Virginia asked Avram, since he's Jewish, are there words that shouldn't be used? Because her daughter,
No, my elder
Granddaughter.
son, my elder grandson, is engaged to a really beautiful, lovely, conservative Jewish woman
conservative Jewish woman.
who is also a Yankee.
So she wants to know if there are certain words that shouldn't be used, and
Certain
Avram
words
says,
that-
Well, what I said was,
Can you
there's
hear
an
him?
old Jewish saying that if there are 2 Jews in the room, there are 3 opinions.
can you hear that?
Well, one thing you should know is that the conservative branch of Judaism is not synonymous with politically conservative. That conservative, there are many different. Every congregation is different,
oh, okay.
and that conservative isn't the same connotation as we normally use the word conservative.
Okay.
You know, that there are many liberal, you know, and people may not be aware of this, but, you know, for instance, politically, politically, in every presidential election, about 80% of Jews vote Democratic and about 20% vote conservative, you
Yeah.
know, or Republican, and you can't really. It's a very diverse community, you know. So when you ask what might insult some and not others, there are some people who get insulted if you refer to Jewish people as Jews,
Yep.
shortening it to Jews, you know.
Yes.
Instead of
That-
Jewish.
Yeah.
Instead of Jewish people, yeah.
Gotcha.
But it doesn't bother me
Yeah.
to be referred to as a Jew, you know. It would certainly be derogatory to use, you know, the equivalent of the N-word in for Jews. It would be maybe kike, you
Yeah.
know, or something like that, or a yid.
Oh.
You know,
I've never heard-
that would be
Huh.
derogatory, I think, considered derogatory by most people. But just, I think it insults me when any kind of generalization is made about Jewish people. You know, just
Yeah.
saying that all Jews are this, all Jews are that,
Yes.
all Jews are greedy, all Jews Jews control the world.
Yes.
You know, control the news media. They own, you know, they run the world. You know, all of this is the kind of thing that results in the Holocaust. You know,
Yes.
and persecution of any people when you try to differentiate them from other people and make generalizations. So I would just be careful not to generalize and make assumptions just
Yep.
because somebody is Jewish that
Yep.
that they believe one thing or another.
Thank you.
All right. When I was a little kid, the newspaper, like we're saying, they would always identify a black person who did something wrong, but the others, they would just make it, you know, a person did something wrong. And we knew that it was white if it was just a person, but they always said black. So when we were kids, if a crime happened, we'd go, oh my God, we hope it wasn't a black man.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Isn't that terrible? It's been rough. But a lot of black, it seems like this keeps going in and out. Can y'all hear me? Can you hear me back there?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, it seems like we need to realize how many black people were firsts in things who, you know, they had to really suffer. Like Walter Scruggs in Franklin was the first African American student to go to Franklin High School, and he ended up being the first kid to go from there to Demers, Georgia, to Piedmont College. He was the first black there. He made great inroads at both places. But he came home that first semester. He was going to be top on his ball team, and he came home for Christmas, and unfortunately his brother drove around the curve and hit him head on and killed him.
Oh, God.
But they have at Franklin High School, after all these years, they have a Walter Scruggs award that they give out that is about someone who brought down barriers and tried to do everything he could. But you know that he still had to go through a lot to get that. But they said it was the largest funeral that had ever been held in Franklin when they had his funeral. That was written up in the Jet magazine. Does anybody know Jet magazine?
Yes, I always wanted to be a jet girl.
Oh my goodness! that I was always hacked when I saw the Jet Girls. So Jet magazine, Ebony magazine, and Sepia magazine were the main African American magazines when I was a little kid. And Ebony and Essence now are still around, right? So it's tough because people say, well, how come you have to have your own Miss Black America or your own? Well, why not? I mean, we weren't accepted in the other group, right? So we had to do our own. Any more comments about this? I was saying about Walter Scruggs, and then Sanithia Scruggs is his sister, and she just retired from teaching in Franklin. But Shirley West Parks was, her story is unbelievable. And you have the book. If you have the book, I know you said you have it, read about Shirley West Parks and what she went through to get to be a teacher, and finally to be the principal of East Franklin Elementary School. It was really a journey, I'm telling you. And it's understandable because my mother worked for one of the principals of one of the schools in Cherokee County, and he told her to have me call him one day so that I could get a job teaching in the schools. I have a bachelor's degree, so all I would have to do in North Carolina was take a few education courses as I went along. I could be hired first and then just take these education courses. So I went down to the school to talk to the principal, and he was moving his head like this as I walked in the door. And I'm like, well, what is it? And I said, I came to apply for a teaching job. He said, nope, you saw Kurt Casey with Mary Sue. Kurt Casey was a highway patrolman. He said, if I was going to hire anybody black, I'd get that boy out there that's a highway patrolman in Haywood County. Boy.
Yeah.
And no, you're a woman. I'm not going to hire you, but I'm not hiring anybody black because well, why would a highway patrolman quit his job to come and teach under somebody that was that ignorant? I'm serious. That was very ignorant. And he was the principal, and he became a well-known person in Cherokee County, and highly respected and everything, but not by me.
Yeah.
We talked about the statue of Harriet, and in the beginning we thought Jada was going to come and meet with us earlier on. Was it Amy that first talked to me, or?
Yes.
I think Amy was talking to me and saying, maybe it was Amy. I don't want to lie on her, but whoever it was told me that maybe Jada would be here to talk to us. But Jada was the model for the Harriet. Well, you heard that. For the Harriet statue, and the little kid was her child, according to what I heard. I don't know that. That's what I heard. In Franklin, there's a place called Going Postal. Going Postal is a business run by a woman who her son is an executive. I don't know what his business is, but I'm going to interview and find out. He set her up in Going Postal, and it does every service that the U.S. Postal Service has, including boxes, mailboxes, and that kind of thing. And it's in downtown Franklin.
Well, I have a
question.
Is that a?
Is there any list in Western Carolina of black-owned businesses? Okay.
I've looked for it and there is not. We talked about that earlier. She and her husband, Eleanor and her husband, Thomas, own a party planning business called A Party in a Box. And she does beautiful work.
But she's asking us if that count as a black-owned business.
Yeah, but
Yes.
I was saying, is there a master list
Yeah.
so we can support black-owned businesses? And she said no. We should make
There
one.
might be a job for us.
Something for you to do.
Oh,
Hey
yeah.
Kelly, you can start that list.
Oh,
Yes.
Kelly, get that, Kelly.
Ron DeSantis in Florida said that black people benefited by being. I heard that. By being slaves that being brought here and enslaved here. Well, what's so ridiculous, and sometimes even my best friends that are white people, well, some black people too, to tell the truth, they don't realize that blacks were here way before slavery. Black explorers went all over the world. If you look at Hannibal, and look at what Hannibal did with his elephants, you know, people know that elephant part, but they don't know the rest of it. Hannibal conquered people all over the world, like Genghis Khan did for Chinese people. So look up Hannibal and read that, and then you can read about metallurgy in Africa, where they did ironwork. And Ron DeSantis wants to say that black people learned blacksmithing in this country. No way. They already knew how to do that. They brought it here. They probably taught all the people that were on those plantations how to do it. Also, blacks brought rice to this country, yams. There are a lot of different things. I don't know about tobacco. I can't remember about tobacco right now, but
That was a native.
That was a
native. Okay. So we'll find. I'm learning. So I want you all to teach me while I'm telling you what I know. I need you to tell me what you know. And so Marty's going to send out all of our information, my information. Contact me if you have information you want to share with me. The word woke. Who wants to?
Oh, Lord.
I hate that that's become a bad word.
I know. I know.
Oh, my gosh.
Well,
Become a dirty word.
it's a dirty word, yeah.
It's like,
The Webster Dictionary, Merriam-Webster Dictionary says that being woke in the political sense in the African American community describes an informed, educated person who is conscious of social injustice and racial inequality. That's what Merriam-Webster Dictionary says woke is. But DeSantis says the intent is to limit, I'm saying his intent is to limit discussion and any curriculum in schools about race, systemic oppression, gender, and sexual orientation with the parental rights, and the name of the law is the Parental Rights in Education Law. He said black people benefited from some of the skills they learned in slavery, and he said like blacksmithing. Racism and deliberate ignorance by brainwashed people causes people to believe that we were backward, that we are backward, ignorant, and starving, that was the way we were when the white people found us and bought us from other Africans. And when I was a little kid, if you wanted to say something negative about black people and the way they act, they said, well, you know, black people were told over, T-O-L-L-E-D, told over here with a piece of red cloth. So it meant that they didn't get anything out of it. They sold us, some of their own neighbors, to the slavers, and they didn't get anything out of it. So that's what the piece of red cloth meant. I'm about done. just remember that before Columbus got here, there were black people here, and you can look at pre-Columbian Africans coming to this to the North and South America. And if you look at Mexico's history and look at all those statues, all those black faces, that tells you something. So check that out for yourself. I thank Virginia for sending me, Virginia Turnbull here, I thank her for sending me the information on the black presence in America before Columbus. So that's what you can look up if you want to find out more about the fact that we've been here all along, not just as slaves or enslaved people. So now we're going over to Mingus Mill, and there is a slave cemetery there. It says slave graveyard. I think on the National Park Service it says graveyard, but it's a cemetery because there's no church there. Don Cassida, who lives in Swain County, is a great historian, and he sent me a whole bunch of information about the black people that lived in this region that I'll have to go through and check out, because I didn't know a lot of this information he had. So that's why I'm saying all of us together are going to make this make a difference. Now, so that you can talk up a storm after we leave from Mingus Mill, I'm going to ask us to sing another song called Canaan Land. Canaan Land represented to the Africans. You know, I don't know how many people read the Bible, but Canaan Land was the place of freedom for the Jewish people that were escaping from the Egyptians. Wanting to get to freedom is very important. So Canaan Land could be represented by Canada. The Jordan River was like the Ohio River. And so there's a song called Canaan Land that we still kind of sing it sometimes in churches, in the black churches. It says, I'm on my way to Canaan Land. So I want you to sing it. This is a call and response song. It's when I say it, except for the last phrase, when I say, I'm on my way, you say,
I'm on my way
to Canaan Land.
to Canaan Land.
I'm on my way
I'm on my way
to Canaan Land.
to Canaan Land.
I'm on my way
On my
to
way
Canaan Land.
to Canaan Land.
And then I'm on my way. Praise God, I'm on my way. If you won't go,
If you don't go,
don't you hinder me.
don't you hinder me.
If you don't go,
If you don't go,
don't you hinder me.
don't you hinder me.
If you don't go,
If you don't go,
don't you hinder
don't
me.
you hinder me.
I'm on my way. Praise God, I'm on my way. If you don't go,
If you don't go,
I'll journey on.
I'll journey on.
If you don't go,
If you don't go,
I'll journey on.
I'll journey on.
If you don't go,
If you don't go,
I'll journey
I'll
on.
journey on.
I'm on my way. Praise God, I'm on my way. See, y'all can sing. I love it. And that is, we're close to the mill. That is the last part of my presentation, except I want us to sing Wade in the Water somewhere when we're on our close back to Liberty. And I have a little closing prayer that they used to use at the old ladies in my church used to mainly use this prayer. So we'll say thank you for your presence and for your attention. And I'm grateful because I feel highly respected by you all. Thank you.
Can I make some announcements? Carol, you wanted to make an announcement? Okay.
Do it now because people can hear, I think. My wife tells me I have 4 points to make, so listen up. We're going to have a salad supper that will also have a silent auction on the 5th Saturday in September. Careful, Marty, you're interrupting me. Tell me when you're done. I'm on my way. Tell me when you're done.
I'm done.
All right, fifth Saturday in September, which is September the 3rd for those of you. 30th, yeah. Can't even read my own handwriting. It's going to be held at in Webster at the Child Development Center. Marty is going to be transmitting the email list that she has compiled to Carol, or one or the other of them will send out more information about the Solid Supper, so be on the lookout for it. And then finally, we will be asking when you get that for people to donate salads for the Salad Supper. That's where the salads come from. And also items for the silent auction. If you have some lovely things that you have no sentimental attachment for, and every time you look at it you say, why the hell don't we get rid of that? That may be a perfect silent auction item because somebody may love it. That's it for me. Those are 4 points. Don't
Well
forget.
done. We're having a big African American experience weekend, and we didn't even know about it. So it's up there right now, so there are going to be people up there, but this person's taking time out of her back-to-back talks so she can talk with us.
Oh.
Okay.
So she's going to talk at the slave.
No, she's going. Thank you. Good question. She's going to be at the parking lot.
Okay. Well, the slave burial area is right off the parking lot.
Right. Okay. She's going to be talking in the parking lot, and Amy McKenzie let me know. I'm sure there's a place. She's not going to stand in the middle of the tarmac or whatever. But there are panels there for those of you who don't want to walk up. They're apparently new educational panels that talk about Mingus Mill. And any of you who know the jazz singer Charles Mingus, this is an ancestor. It's an interesting story, not an atypical story, but an interesting story about he's a descendant of the people at Mingus Mill. That's it. There's bathrooms. Wow, there's bathrooms up there too. Yeah.
If you've never been to Mingus Mill, the slave burial area is right close to the parking area, or you can take the hiking trail that goes up the hill and then makes a steep right hand, and that's where the white people's plantation cemetery was, and that's marked and protected and preserved. But the slave cemetery is the one that is right close to the parking area, and it's a real well, when I was there, it was probably a year and a half ago, so I don't know what they've beautified with this presentation, but there's a really stark difference between the going up the trail and then up here, and then there's this clearing that had all the tombstones and markings that was kind of a sacred space for the wealthy whites, and then there were hardly even markers where the slaves were buried down below, which just kind of showcased what the history was.
So I was there in March, and the enslaved cemetery is up the trail. The Enloe is at the top of the trail.
We'll
right?
Yeah, we'll see when
we'll
we
see
get
when
there.
we get
We'll
there.
get there. I've been told it's a little bit of a hike.
It's
And
not
also,
far.
I was corrected by our fearless leader here. Someone said to me, because I called it the graveyard, and she said, no, it's a cemetery. Then someone from the Park Service said, it's the Enloe Enslaved Cemetery. And she said, you cannot enslave a cemetery. So it's called officially the slave cemetery, Enloe. And the Enloes were a family up there. Okay. And one more thing. When you read about this area, it's interesting how even on the Park Service, they talk about kind of in vague terms about what the relationship between the Mingus family who was black and the Mingus family who was white was. It's kind of, it's like so many histories in the South. It's like, oh yeah, they were the happy workers in the house. But a lot of times, it was
And there's a really
enslavement.
sacred Cherokee space in that property area too.
Really? Good. All right, well,
I was a
enough.
bit disturbed by Mary saying that
the lady was just did light housework. Forget that.
Well, that's what we're told, as I can say as a Southern white girl, we're told that there were just a few bad white folks. It was really just, they were very benevolent enslavers.
Well, that was, and that's what, that was his.
Where is the cemetery?
So the cemetery is where that sign is. That's where the trailhead is.
No, you weren't. It just,
If you do
oh yeah,
if you go by yourself, we do ask that you stay to the right.
I did. I haven't.
I think we're ready.
Okay.
Hello everyone. I want to first thank you all so much for being here. I'm really grateful that you took some time today to learn more about the history here in Great Smoky Mountains National Park.
You're going to need to speak up.
Sorry. Again, my name is Rachel. I'm an interpretive park ranger here in the Smokies. And today we are at the site of the historic Mingus Mill. It's a grist mill that processes both corn and wheat, built in 1886. And every day, hundreds of people come to this site to visit the mill and get a glimpse of what life was like here in the late 1800s. But oftentimes, a lot of people who come here, they miss a whole another history that's very crucial to understanding life here in the Smokies and Southern Appalachia, and that is the story of African Americans who live in the Smokies. And so I'll be talking about that today specific to this site. And so folks know a lot about the Mingus family, and they were a white family that settled in the Conaluftee Bottoms, where we are today, in the late 1700s. And the park is doing more of an effort today to talk about the black Minguses, so descendants of this Mingus family who built this mill, lived in this area, that were African American. And so this sign, I'm going to talk about it a little bit. I wanted y'all in the shade, so if you wanted to like scoot over and look at it while I'm talking, that's perfectly fine. But what you'll see on this new interpretive sign is the story of Charles Mingus Jr. Charles Mingus Jr. is a legendary jazz musician. He was very influential in the American music scene of the 20th century. He was a double bassist, a pianist, composer, band leader as well. And from what I'm reading, just a genius in terms of the realm of jazz music. And his roots are here in the Smokies. And so Charles Mingus Jr., I have a family tree here that I'm going to pass around to give you like a visual understanding of the relationship. So Charles Mingus Jr., his grandfather was Daniel Mingus. Daniel Mingus was formerly enslaved by the Mingus family. Okay? Daniel Mingus worked for the Mingus family. He was known as a craftsman and also a farmhand based on the records that we know so far. But he was a free person who continued to live with the Mingus family and took on their family name. Not a lot is known about Daniel Mingus and his life here, but what we do know is that he ended up marrying a white woman. Her name was Sarah Pinion, and they had about five children together. But during their relationship, Daniel Mingus had an extramarital affair with Claudia Mingus, who is the granddaughter of John Mingus, who built and owned this Mingus Mill. So she was a white woman. And so just knowing that story, that a formerly enslaved person ended up marrying into the family that enslaved him, just gives you an idea about sort of the complexity during that time, but also the complex family relationships. And if you look at that family tree, there's different branches going off, different relationships, and I think that's pretty relatable to our own family relationships. Even though we want them to be like this person when here it's all clear cut, most of the time it doesn't end up being that way, right? Our branches are twisted and who knows who's going where. And so although that's a complex family relationship, it's a rich history that we want to tell the story about more here in the Smokies, so that you will have a richer understanding of this place and the history and culture here. And so Daniel Mingus had Charles Mingus Sr. with Clorinda Mingus. Charles Mingus Sr., he grew up here. His mother, Clorinda, ended up moving away and remarrying. So Charles Mingus Sr. ended up being raised by his grandparents and great-grandparents. And we don't know a lot about his childhood. We don't have documentation at the current moment. But what we do know is that when Charles Mingus Sr. was a little boy, his family recorded him as white in the census. And again, that just kind of gives us some sort of idea of how the family relationships were at that time, kind of denoting that Charles Mingus Sr., although he was biracial, they categorized him as white. And based on that information, we can kind of make the connection of why Charles Mingus Sr. decided to leave the Smokies pretty early. He was about 14 or 15 that we believe he left home, which is pretty young to leave home. So again, that's probably another kind of clue for us to understand that those deeper family issues or tensions that might be going on during that time. And so Charles Mingus Sr., we don't know much about him once he left home, but then he appears on records in his 20s, he enrolled in the Army. And so he was part of the 24th Infantry Regiment, which was a segregated group, also known as the Buffalo Soldiers. Yeah. Buffalo Soldiers. And so Buffalo Soldiers, they were tasked to fight out west to expand the western frontier. So they were fighting against indigenous groups. Charles Mingus Sr. also served in the Spanish-American War. And Buffalo Soldiers, if you don't know that amazing history as well, they were the park's first park rangers of the National Park Service. They were tasked, yeah, it's a beautiful history, and I'm gladly, wearing, maybe what they might have wore back then. And I have sequoia cones on my hat, and all park rangers have sequoia cones on our hats and on our belt, because the first park rangers, the Buffalo Soldiers, I can pass that down. The first park rangers or Buffalo Soldiers, groups of them are also sent to the first national parks in our country. So Yosemite, Yellowstone, Sequoia all had Buffalo Soldiers there that were our first park rangers. And so Charles Mingus Sr. served in the Army for about 20 years. And that family history is complex, and there's much more that we probably need to learn about that family. But that's just one specific story that is really important to the Smokies and the site that we are at today. And so, compared to the Mingus family, which are white settlers, we know a lot about the European American settlers that came to this area in the late 1700s. We know some history about the Native Americans, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians who are here. And the museum in Cherokee does a great job of telling that history and those stories. But unfortunately, we know little. We have little documentation about African American experiences in the Smokies in southern Appalachia. And so in 2018, the park decided to make more of an effort to record, explore, document that history, that rich history that is here. And that's part of the African American Experience Project that is led by Antoine Fletcher, who you might have been in contact with earlier. And so with that project, we're trying to record African American experiences here in the Smokies and surrounding communities from 1540s to present day. And it's an amazing project because these are all your parks, and so we should tell all the stories within our parks and give that rich history. So although we don't have a lot of written documentation about life for African Americans here, what we do have are cemeteries. And at this site we have the Enlow Slave Cemetery, which we will be visiting today. Enlow comes from white settlers similar to Mingus family who settled here late 1700s, who were also enslavers.
And your hat's being filmed.
That's all right.
Sorry, you can't have your hat back.
That's why I wanted to be a park ranger, just to wear that. Okay, so
you said they were also enslavers, the Enlows.
the Enlows, the Minguses, they were both enslavers, and the Floyds were here. So we know that the Minguses, Floyds, and Hyde families were all white families in this valley.
Wait just a moment.
Thank you.
Got a turn.
And again, we know a lot about those families, but we're trying to do a better job in filling that void of African American experiences here, making the invisible visible. And so today we're going to visit the Enlow Slave Cemetery. We're going to move on to the trailhead to that cemetery. And because it's a small space and it's very sensitive, I'm going to talk most of the time at that trailhead, and then I can take up smaller groups to see the cemetery, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Because we have a bit of a big group, which is great.
Are you going to talk about the, I'm sorry, go ahead, before, I don't want to break in on what.
Okay, but feel free if I'm leaving
Okay.
anything out.
What they talked about, the coins and.
Yeah, I will
you're gonna
definitely
okay.
talk about that. Thank you for bringing that up. But before we go to the trailhead, I want to talk about cemeteries just for a little bit. Cemeteries can mean a lot for people at different times of their lives. They can be places of mourning, places of remembrance, places of renewal. But I think at their essence, cemeteries are places that we have to remember. And so as we move on to the trailhead, I'm going to ask you all to reflect on your own life story. If I were to ask you to write a biography about yourself in a sentence, in a paragraph, what would that look like? Could you condense all your life experiences, the stories that make you who you are today, in a brief sentence? And just reflect on that as we move to the cemetery. And then please, if you want to pass by the sign. Expeditions of Hernando de Soto in 1540s. He was in western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee. He had enslaved people with him, and he was looking for gold, I believe, and surveying this area. Another key event is the exploits of Sir Francis Drake, who also had enslaved people, and he was trying to colonize Roanoke Island in North Carolina. And so those are the two instances that we can kind of draw on to the origins of how slavery came to be in this region. But slavery here in the Smokies looked a bit different from the large-scale sort of plantations that we see in the southern states. And that's because in this mountainous region, it's difficult to transport people and goods. Another reason is that in the mountains, folks had smaller plantations, so they didn't really have the cash crops and income to afford bigger operations. And so they were more focusing on livestock as well as growing crops such as apples or tobacco. And so the Enlow Slave Cemetery, we know that there are African American individuals buried in the cemetery in front of you based on oral stories, but also based on slave schedules. And so I'll pass this one around, and you can see that family member, I believe it's Abraham Enlow, is listed on the left column. And so slave schedules were additional documents that folks had to record during the census of 1850s and 1860s. And so slaveholders recorded how many enslaved people they owned. And so based on that information and other records, we were able to deduce that this is indeed a cemetery with folks who were enslaved during the 1860s. And that's pretty much all we know, unfortunately, because...
Question.
Yes,
While
ma'am.
you're doing the African American experience, are you doing anything on the free blacks that were here?
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. To relate to that, we know in the park that there are 6 burial sites with African American individuals in them, but there were also freed people of color who lived within the boundaries of the park today in, I believe, Elkmont area and Cades Cove. But again, that's another story that we should highlight as well, to give the different perspectives of what was going on during that time.
Can I ask you a question about
Yes,
the
sir.
DeSoto expedition?
Yes.
Is it thought that enslaved people were left behind once
Yes.
they went back?
That's what I read
or
so
escaped
far.
somehow?
Yeah, I think both of those narratives are what are going around right now. I don't know much about the expedition, but that's what I know so far is they were either left here or they escaped. Yes, sir. And so, based on the slave schedules, we get a better idea of the individuals who were laid to rest here. And another thing that we're doing is research using this device here, and that's a device for ground penetrating radar, or GPR. And so how it works, it looks like a lawnmower, and what's happening are radar waves are being sent into the ground about 8 to 11 feet, and then they're able to detect disturbances in the soil. And that gives us sort of a layered image of the burials in the cemetery. And based on the information and research done in collaboration with Western North Carolina, we know that there are about 8 burials in the cemetery. But when we travel up there, you'll only kind of recognize 5 because of the head and foot stones that are there. So this research has given us a broader scope of the site that's here. Another thing that the park is doing is using cadaver dogs that could scent decomposition. And the cadaver dogs were interested in places outside of the realm of the cemetery. So that might give indication that there are more people buried here that we haven't known before.
Where are the enslaved people of the Minlos? The Minguses?
Minguses, so from what I've read and researched, it's quite possible that both enslaved people from those families could be buried here.
Even though it's just called the Minlos Cemetery.
Correct. But I've seen it in some literature be referred to both names, so maybe that's why. And so I'm going to take small groups up to visit there, and I asked you all to think about your life experiences, right? Reflect on your own life. But what if I asked you all to condense your whole life into one word?
You're going to talk about the stones down here too. You're going to say anything about the stones?
Yes. Does anyone want to share their one word?
Blessed.
Blessed, I like that. Yeah.
Honored. Honored.
Honored. Love that. Anyone else? For me, I would say daughter, but again, that doesn't really sum up my life and who I am as a person. And so for many of us, when we're gone, maybe we will only be summed up by a paragraph or a word. But we have that choice in some ways. We can, maybe tell our family members, hey, tell my story. This is how I want to be remembered. But the folks who are buried in the cemetery in front of you didn't have that choice necessarily. When you go up to the cemetery, what you'll see is there are the 5 distinct graves that have both head and foot stones. And that was very common here in southern Appalachia. And they are going to be facing east to west, and that relates to religious practices of being prepared for the second coming of Christ. Another thing that you'll see in the cemetery are the mounds and the troughs. And so in the Smokies, it rains here a lot. It's a rainforest, and so that soil and sediment gets moved and pushed down the slope. And so we don't know who, but people who cared about those that are here, they made sure that those burials were marked. So they moved the soil to make sure that if there was any movement, they readjusted. If that makes sense. Another thing that you'll notice, and it's shown here in this picture, and you'll see it as we go up, is that coins are left at the burial. And that connects to a practice in African culture that you have to pay a toll when you reach your afterlife to get to the next realm. And so people leave coins behind to ensure that those that have been lost can go to that next chapter, to that next realm. So that's another custom that's visible here. So before, people might have left shells, maybe a wooden spoon or a cup that person made or cared a lot about, but we don't know. And so the coins is really special because it's that continuation of that ritual, but also just the love and care for someone, right? And so another thing that you'll notice as we hike up is that it's pretty steep, right? And so you can just imagine the effort it took to take someone up this hill, dig through that really dense soil, and to bury them. And so, although these people in the cemetery in front of you were in bondage, they were practicing a very human right. And that is to care for someone that you loved and that you care about, and make sure that they go on to that next chapter, to that next life. So that's something I really like to think about, because it's really human in us to care about someone and to bury them. And so I asked you all to think about that word of how to define yourself, but what if that word didn't exist, right? And the head and footstones that we have in the cemetery are not marked. So we don't know who these people are, but just how you might define yourself as a daughter, someone who's honored, these people were craftsmen, they were woodworkers, they were hunters, maybe they were botanists, they were many things. But unfortunately, we've lost that sort of connection to them or their story. But just kind of imagine what stories they would tell about themselves if they could. And we have the power to tell our stories today, but how we're remembered is really out of our hands, right? It's really up to the next generation to remember us and tell our story. And so I kind of want to ask you all a question, and we can open up for discussion, or you can just reflect on it. But do you want to be forgotten? And based on your answer, how should we preserve places like the Enloe Slave Cemetery? And that's a hard question, right? And I don't think there's a right answer. But at the end of the day, it's our responsibility, whatever that looks like, to preserve these places, because we all can relate to caring for someone that we love and mourning them at a place. And this is such a place, because these were loved ones, daughters, aunts, fathers, and you can say it's our responsibility to continue telling that story. But it's really a reflection of us whether we do so or not.
You're a wonderful storyteller.
Thank you.
You're really a fabulous
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really been a pleasure talking about this space, because it means a lot to tell stories that if we don't remember, we'll forget. And it's really up to us to do the remembering. When we're gone, we have no say on how we're going to be remembered, but at least today we can remember the people here. So with that, I'm going to split you all into two groups, or if anyone wants to stay behind. It is steep, folks. I have bad knees myself, but just know your limitations. But I'll take a small group up there for now, and we can switch off, just so you can enjoy and view the space.
And we need to leave be on that bus no later than 10 after, so I'm not sure.
It's 7 till.
7 till, so you got about 10
run up the
minutes.
hill.
So those of you who are around, but this was worth it. Thank you so much.
I'll watch.
About how many minutes? About how many minutes is the walk?
That's what I said, I don't know.
So they've came here with the ground penetrating radar a couple times now. I'm not sure how much, but they have a better idea of the people that are, at least a number of people that are buried here. But I think there are plans to do other cemeteries in the park and maybe move out more, because with the cadaver dogs, they kind of sense there are more individuals buried here. Yeah.
So when was the research done that discovered the bodies?
Well, I guess I don't know exactly. But I think it's been known for a while that the cemetery has been here, but maybe the park just didn't move forward with research until recently.
I remember reading over the years, like the discovery and the, different things that they have done. And I guess they don't want bottle tops.
And the coins are just people who've come up to
so
to
those
view
are
in their
people
remembrance.
today who want to pay homage or pay tribute. We think it's a child based on the size. It might have been an infant, and I think it's they might be located in that area.
The end. Yeah.
And that was common. A lot of cemeteries here you see. It's really sad, but you know, infant burials because life was so hard here and it was very remote. So if you got past the age of 3, they're like, okay, you're good. You'll have a longer life. Mm-hmm.
Okay, this song is Wade in the Water and everybody knows it, right? Okay. So we'll just start singing. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Well, what's that yonder I see so white? God's gonna trouble the water. Well, it must be the children of the Israelites. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. What's that yonder I see so red? God's gonna trouble the water. I said it must be the children that Moses led. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. God's gonna trouble the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Oh, y'all are great. Now, that was Harriet Tubman's favorite song I read because it meant that while she was taking the escapees to the north, to Canaan land, if the dogs were after them, they couldn't sniff them in the water. So she would tell them to get in the water. So y'all know that story. I love it. Now, those things were called code songs. And there are many, many more spirituals that were code songs that said, we're getting out of here. For the ones who were trustworthy, they wouldn't tell on them when they were leaving. So, of course, there were people always who wanted to curry favor with the owners. And so, like Fiddler said, when he was talking to Kunta Kinte and Roots, he was like, don't mess up my fresh pine bowl bed now. So we had some of that, but in general, Harriet took at least 300 people out of the South, out of Maryland north, and got them to safety up north. We don't know how they were safe up there either, because people from New York have often told me, oh, I don't know anything about that stuff. You know, we always went to school together. I would say, stop. New York was a horrible place for slaves. They would catch the people who escaped and sell them back to the South and send them down the river to Mississippi if they could. So we got to remember that this whole country has to think about what we've done and straighten it out as much as possible. Well, when I was a little kid, I loved going to church because it was very interesting. We had all this real spiritual hand clapping, foot stomping. It was just exciting to be in church, and it was good because you like to see these old ladies shouting. There was a man that was so, they called it filled with the Holy Spirit, that he was dressed in a suit, and I'll say this about the churches. Black people had to work the most filthy jobs, but on Sunday they could get all dolled up. They could get dressed up in their suits. Even if the suit was a second-hand suit, they could get dressed up and they were dignified standing up there before us. The women in their dresses with their hats on and everything, they felt good in church. So when people don't understand what church meant to black people back then and why there is a problem nowadays, it is because that was a society within itself. So there was a woman, and I can even hear it in my head, but I couldn't do it. When we sang harmony, she did the descant. She was up there above everybody, and it was beautiful, and it just made me think, if heaven was like this, I might not mind singing all day. But anyway, her sister always said this at the end of her prayer. She would do a prayer, you know, blessing everybody, the pastor, everything, and being happy to be there and all. That lady that sang the descant made $4 a week working in somebody's home, and she made $4, and every Friday night her son would get drunk and go to town. Now, he didn't bother anybody. He was the sweetest drunk you've ever seen. But the law would pick him up and charge 50 cents for him to get out of jail. Can you imagine her having to pay 50 cents out of her $4 that she made that week? It was awful. My dad was so hurt by that. He said he couldn't do anything because he wasn't making money either. But at the end of Miss Esther Bowens, who was my Sunday school teacher, at the end of her prayer, she would say this: "And when I've done all that's assigned my hands to do and can't do no more, please give me a peaceful and happy hour to die. In the precious name of Jesus I pray, amen." So that's our closing. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you. Thank you.